Hi, it's Emma back for more writing videos. We've previously gone over the intro to a basic essay and the thesis statement, and now we're moving on to the body paragraph. What I'm going to talk about are a few basic models that should, again, help you if you are struggling to figure out how to start off. There are, of course, many more complex and varied ways of writing essays, and I'm in no way trying to say that this is the only way. It's just a basic model to help you start off. As you become more familiar with this structure, you can start to venture outside of this kind of formulaic model and start to experiment with your own structures and what feels most comfortable and intuitive to you. The thing with writing is that it's so personal that these basic essay writing videos are in no way meant to instruct a specific path, rather to guide you if you're stuck. With that, let's go on to body paragraphs. So the first thing to remember about a body paragraph is that everything comes back to the thesis statement. Your body paragraphs are going to build on and prove your thesis. So one way to think about this is this cylinder. If your thesis is the circle at the top, your essay has some room to move within your thesis, but rather than moving on to many different topics, left and right, you want to dive deeper into the topics presented in the thesis. You should be constantly asking yourself if what you're writing is related to the thesis. If you find yourself straying from your argument, then it is time to refocus and ask, what is my purpose? Though that could have a larger meaning, it, in this case, refers back to what is my purpose for writing this essay? Why am I writing this? And then finally, who is my audience? To keep those three questions in mind is a way to keep a very focused essay. The body paragraphs, like your introduction, will transition from general to specific, starting with your topic sentence. Now, a topic sentence is like a mini thesis. It tells you where you're going with that specific paragraph, and it is the connection from the thesis to specific ideas. For example, if I'm writing an analytical essay, and my thesis reads, "Throughout the passage, Billy's tone changes from angry to accepting, revealing that in the end he has retained his humanity." Well, here's my thesis. If I'm moving on to my first body paragraph, my topic sentence might look something like this. In the beginning, Billy's frustration with his situation comes across as rage. Here I focus on one aspect of my thesis, the first part, the part about Billy's anger. And in general, your body paragraphs should follow the chronology that has been set up by the thesis. So if I start off talking about anger, I probably want to have my first body paragraph discuss anger. My topic sentence discusses Billy's frustration and his rage, and therefore the rest of my paragraph is going to have to prove this part of my topic sentence, which proves a part of my thesis. So the next part of a body paragraph would include evidence. Evidence is going to be the specific factual part of your argument. It could be a statistic, a quote from a book, an anecdote, or a statement of fact that you think will help further your argument, or that will prove a part of your thesis or your topic sentence. So, moving on, we have our thesis, our topic sentence, and now we need our evidence. Let's say I want to use this quote from the passage. Billy stomped away, a frown covering his reddened face. Now, it is also important that your evidence is smoothly integrated into your sentence so that there is a connection between the topic sentence and the evidence. One way I could go about doing this is taking this quote, Billy stomped away, a frown covering his reddened face, and place it in context for the reader. So my sentence might now read something like this. These angered sentiments are expressed as Billy stomped away, a frown covering his reddened face. This is called integrating the quote into the sentence. And it's a really useful tool for any essay. You're always going to want to place some context before you just plop your quote down there. Here I've picked evidence from my text that I think relates to my topic sentence that introduces the idea of Billy being angry. But I still haven't proved anything yet. Most of my work comes in the next section, the analysis. The analysis section is going to be the next part of your body paragraph. It's going to take your evidence and explain to the reader how this evidence connects to your topic sentence. It is the link between the evidence and the main idea. It will also elaborate on the idea presented in your topic sentence. Some people might think that it is pretty self-explanatory why Billy is angry. He stomps, his face is red. Well, the analysis section is meant to clearly and explicitly explain why that evidence leads to your conclusion, or why that leads to the idea that you've presented, the argument that you've presented. It may seem obvious to you why Billy is angry, but it is your job as the writer to lead the reader down the same mental path that you're taking. So I've had it explained to me helpfully as point A being the evidence and point C being the thing you're trying to prove. You need a point B, the analysis, to connect the two. So if we're going to maintain this example of Billy being angry as our first body paragraph, we have our thesis now, we have a topic sentence, we have evidence that is integrated into a context, and here is my analysis. Here, the author purposefully employs a strong verb, stomp, to connote haste and frustration. The passage also focuses on details of Billy's face, the frown to express his distaste for the situation, and a reddened face to evoke an image of Billy as overwhelmed and impassioned, emotion rising to his cheeks. Here, I describe what parts of the language convey the underlying emotion of anger. I don't talk about any other part of the thesis, Billy retaining his humanity or accepting his fate or whatever he's accepting, because my topic sentence only covers this part of the text. I was always taught that the analysis should be at least 3 times the length of the evidence or the length of the quote, but obviously this is going to vary from case to case. Sometimes the quote is 1 or 2 words, sometimes it is 2 sentences or even a paragraph. But mostly when writing a basic essay, it helps to break down your evidence and then use 1 to 2 sentence pieces of evidence. That way you don't have to worry about falling into a very common trap of using evidence as analysis. However, without the analysis section, the evidence would be useless. And without the evidence, there would be nothing to prove. So these 2 sections are very dependent on each other, and you need to have both in a strong body paragraph and ultimately a strong essay. Also, something to point out is that in my analysis, I break down my evidence even further. I use small snippets from the quote that I'm using to add on to my argument. So now that I've covered analysis, we've concluded the construction of a basic body paragraph. Sometimes I've seen teachers ask for concluding sentences, but I don't understand the point of them. They often restate the topic sentence, but they can be awkward and they don't move the essay forward, so I generally just strongly advise against using a concluding sentence. So again, to break down a body paragraph, it's going to start with the topic sentence. It's going to transition to evidence that's integrated into the paragraph, and then it's finally going to end with the analysis or the elaboration on how that evidence connects to the topic sentence. And so the Billy example was a breakdown of perhaps a literary essay where we take a quote and explain it in detail in context of the entire passage. Of course, we didn't go through the entire essay, but we got a general idea of how the body paragraph looks, and the second body paragraph would be structured in a similar way, just using different evidence and proving a different part of the thesis. Using the same basic model that we just used with Billy, we can also work through a few examples of other kinds of essays, and specifically I think we're going to focus on persuasive and historical. So I'm going to break this down a little bit less explicitly, but we're going to still go through all the steps for the persuasive essay. Let's say that my thesis in this persuasive essay, again, is going to, the thesis is the argument. So though they have potential to promote certain causes, social media sites ultimately detriment society because they consume time that could be otherwise spent productively and prevent. My first paragraph would definitely have to cover the merits of social media sites, and I'm not going to go through that body paragraph. That would be a better paragraph to discuss in terms of an entire essay, because it's not actually proving your point, it's discussing the opposing side. It's what, if you remember from the thesis statement video, we called qualifying. So instead, I'm going to skip through that first body paragraph, and this is going to be what would be, in this essay, our second body paragraph. So the second body paragraph, if we look at the thesis, so first we go through the potential to promote certain causes, and now it's discussing how it ultimately detriments society because it consumes time that could otherwise be spent productively. Now, my topic sentence might transition from that first body paragraph to the new idea. So despite these advantages, because my first body paragraph has just finished talking about the merits of social media sites, my topic sentence for my second body paragraph might say, despite these advantages, social media sites often take up time that could be spent enjoying the outside world. Perhaps this is not a point you would make. Maybe you could say, perhaps this is not a point that everyone would make. But again, the thing about argumentative and really any type of essay is that it's up to the writer to prove their point and to make arguments that are backed by evidence, and they don't necessarily have to be the same for everyone. And that's, again, why writing is such a personal endeavor. However, so let's say that this is the argument I'm making. Next, my evidence would have to then build on my topic sentence. It has to give some substance, my sentence, and to prove I'm not just arguing this point without a foundation of fact. So my next evidence is that the average person spends upwards of 3 hours a day on social media sites like Facebook and Twitter. And then I cite marketcharts.com, where I got that information. And I might do another video later on citing sources and like MLA and bibliographies and stuff, but for now I just put that in there to show that this is where I'm getting my information, and it is a reputable source. Instead of the quote that I used with Billy, I use a fact to prove my point. So finally, my analysis has to connect this evidence with my topic sentence. People of all ages are spending enormous proportions of time on these social media sites. Perhaps visiting Facebook to connect with a friend could promote social interaction. However, at this rate, social media sites have clearly crossed the line from helpful tools to online vampires of sorts that suck away time that could otherwise be spent playing sports, practicing music, or even spending time with friends in real life. This, of course, is a very rudimentary paragraph, and you would want to go into more detail about maybe the benefits of playing sports or being outside. And my next paragraph might go more into why human interaction is more advantageous than interaction over the internet. But that is a basic model of a paragraph. I also say social media sites a bunch, and repetition is never something you want to see in an essay. But that does give the basic idea. So here's the breakdown of that body paragraph. We have the thesis that drives the entire essay, and then the topic sentence breaking down the thesis, evidence building upon the topic sentence, and analysis finally wrapping it all up with discussion of the evidence and the topic sentence and tying them together. It is like a nice little adhesive, Elmer's glue, so to speak. So finally, we're going to move on to the historical essay. Say I'm writing an essay, as I did my junior year, on the late 19th century, early 20th century photojournalist Jacob Riis. And so this is the final example, and therefore it's going to be the most complex, as it is coming from an actual research paper. It should also give an idea of a body paragraph that adheres less strictly to the formula of topic sentence, evidence, analysis, though it still resembles that basic model. First off, we always have to know what the thesis is, because everything comes back to the thesis. So, though historians retrospectively scrutinize his motivations, Riis and his exposés inspired tenement and slum reform movements which embodied the progressive era belief in society's capacity to better itself. So I know that in the essay I'm going to go through this controversy over his life and over the motivations that Jacob Riis had. I'm also going to discuss his tenement reform movements, and then I'm going to somehow tie it back to this very general progressive era belief that I state here. So there's a lot to work with in this thesis, and it did turn out to be a pretty long essay. So if we go back to the thesis, I would probably start off with a bit about Riis's life and give a basic context for the setting in which Jacob Riis lived. But then I would go into the controversy over his motives. But I've actually picked a body paragraph that is somewhere in the middle of the entire essay, and it comes right after I've discussed the controversial motives, and it's going to discuss the way Riis inspired tenement reform movements. So the way I would connect those two ideas is I would say in my topic sentence, regardless of his motives, Riis's work engendered numerous reform movements. So I know that I have just come from this paragraph about his motives, and I'm saying now I'm moving on and discussing these reform movements. This is a pretty long paragraph, so I won't read out loud the whole thing, but feel free to pause and read it for yourself, and I'm going to break it down right now. So this is my topic sentence. Then I give evidence in history papers often come from primary sources. In this specific case, I use a chunk of text from my source, Riis's autobiography. However, it's not necessarily true that history papers are always going to have these really big, hefty pieces of text. I just am trying to give another example of how to form an essay. So we have our topic sentence, and we kind of have this whole part in black text is the context for the quote, which is in blue, and that is how I integrated my quote with many sentences instead of just one. Now, next, I give even more context for the book in the next sentence after it's done, and this whole part in red is going to be my analysis. And if we read through it, I don't insert my personal opinion in my analysis because I don't know enough on my own about Jacob Riis. I am not an expert. I am a high school student, at this time. I have not gotten my PhD on Jacob Riis. And that is perfectly okay to not have a PhD junior year of high school. But because of this, I can't speak from my own knowledge. Rather, I look at many different perspectives on a historical subject, which is Jacob Riis, and then I continue to synthesize those different opinions into my overview of his life. Ultimately, I look at evidence and try to take a more holistic view on a controversial historical subject. And this way of taking multiple different perspectives and then combining them into your own opinion, that also counts as an argument. It is okay to take other people's perspectives into account as long as you give them credit, like I do in these. These are references to my notes in which I discuss my sources. And again, I might go over that in another video in the future. So here is a big body paragraph from a research paper. This was done for AP US History, and it follows that basic structure of topic sentence, integration, quote, and analysis. And that is how most essays are going to be structured. You're going to need those 3 or 4 very crucial elements to create a strong paragraph and a strong essay. So, let's recap. First off, everything comes back to the thesis. The thesis drives the topic sentence upon which the evidence builds, and finally, the analysis ties everything together. So, that was my video about body paragraphs. Again, I hope it was helpful. It should go well with the intro and the thesis as they kind of set up the body paragraphs. And next up will be a video on conclusions, and then that will be it for my basic essay videos, and we'll move on to AP Lang and AP Lit. And yeah, so I hope again that this was helpful, and thank you for watching.